All right, we are back for the Lex and Pete show. This is a post NFL draft reaction. This is a pre Friends Who Gamble rookie draft show. We'll be going over my final mock draft 3.0. Who knows? Maybe there'll be like an emergency mock draft or something. I don't think we'll do an episode for that. But, right now we're recording. It's Monday night. We are less than 48 hours away from the rookie draft. Is that right, Pete?
Less than 48 hours, 1 hour, 24 minutes.
So we're counting it down. We're going to get into my mock draft in a second, but as always, we'll start with a word from our sponsors.
That was so off. 1 day and 24 hours. My bad.
Close enough. So first, we got Sundog Multimedia. As always, Sundog is an online communication and social media company. They were once just a personal tool that has since evolved into something much bigger, allowing users to communicate, research, and discover things that impact their lives and daily decisions. Sundog will collaborate with you to build a modern yet nimble social media strategy by utilizing innovative and traditional media principles. Sundog Multimedia is also a proud supporter of the Stop Soldier Suicide Foundation. You can follow Sundog on Instagram at Sundog_multimedia. That's on Instagram at Sundog_multimedia. Brains, brawn, and true professionalism. That's easy peasy moving and service, moving, muscle for hire, assembly, errands, you name it. They will do it. Easy Peasy is a multi-surface team. If you need something, just ask. All right, Pete. So I do think we had a lot to talk about, but just want to check in with you. Or actually, you know what? Let's just get right into the draft because it starts with you anyways, and then I think I can kind of get some of your thoughts. So I have sent you my draft ahead of the show just so you can kind of get prepped and know what's coming at you. I actually have the wrong page. I have my big board pulled up. Don't want to get that mixed up. But let's just get right into it. So, as it's been for a while now, you have the first two picks, and I think we can kind of cover these together, and I think it's kind of worth talking about together. But the first one that I have is you taking Bryce Young, quarterback, Carolina, with the first overall pick. Now, I know that we have been talking, and then depending on what you do, it might vary on who the first overall pick is. But right now, I feel pretty comfortable locking Bryce Young in. You traded for him February 6th, 2022, and 14 months later, nothing has changed. I kind of view it as maybe him going first overall officially solidified it for you, but I think maybe you're already 99.99% of the way there. But I think you're pretty locked in there. I'll get your reaction to that in a second, just because I do want to get to the second pick where I have you taking Anthony Richardson, quarterback, Indianapolis. So this might be a little controversial, and I don't want to. I know that you didn't want to do the mock drafts because you wanted to keep your cards kind of close to the vest, but this has been something that I've kind of been pushing for a bit, just because while I do think that Bijan is, he's still my number one ranked player. I think I might have bumped him down to number 2, actually, for my overall on the big board. But Bijan, like I said, in the big board blog, and I think we've talked about it plenty of times on the show, but he seems to be as close to a sure thing for NFL success. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be all-time dynasty success, but I do think at the very least he's locked into, top 10 running back for the foreseeable future, year in, year out. And that in itself has a ton of value. But I've been kind of pushing this narrative that I think it's worth you at least stepping back and maybe considering going 2 QB here, because we have seen, maybe rise in the desire to not only just get 2 strong quarterbacks, but to maybe have 3 for that ultimate depth, especially when you're not totally locked in on your top 2. Right now, you do have Deshaun Watson, and I think he will come back and have a stronger season than he did in his comeback season last year. You still don't know that, and that's still something you have to see. And I think with Richardson, we've talked about it over and over again. That's my QB1. That's my number 1 overall player. But I think that he just gives you a floor that is more valuable than anything that a running back can give you. And I think that in Superflex, that's even more important, because if Bryce and Anthony Richardson can turn into what we project them to be, and they can be these star guys, I think that they give you a floor that can last you for a decade plus in this league. And I think that that's very valuable. I think that you can figure out the running back situation elsewhere. You do already have Jonathan Taylor, so you're already strong at the top in that position. Obviously behind him, there's pretty much, I don't think you have a single playable running back. But I think that you can figure that out. And I think we've seen kind of a no running back approach work in this league. We've also seen a running back heavy approach work. But I think one constant is that if you have two strong quarterbacks in the superplex format, that can, really carry you a long way. So I'll pass it over to you to maybe talk about it. I don't know. Like I said, this is just kind of my narrative that I'm pushing. I wouldn't be surprised if you stuck with your, plan that you've had forever and you still go Bryce and Bijan. But I do think it's worth considering. And I'm just wondering if you've given that any more thought yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. First thing I'll say is I just address Bryce. Bryce been the constant since I traded Waddle for him. He's been the constant since we started this. He's been a constant for 16, 17 months now, actually. Bryce Young's been on my team for 2 years. There's not much to say there. We've hit it ad nauseum. He's a pro's pro. I think he's got the highest floor in the class. And, I've gone on and on the show plenty of times about how much I love Bryce. So Bryce is not changing. He's my guy. He's been my guy. He's going to be on Team Slippery Feet. The big change here is Anthony Richardson instead of Bijan Robinson. That is the big change. As this went down, AR goes to Indy. Now, first of all, NFL draft pulled off massive smoke screens, right? Houston was supposed to go defense. Stroud was supposed to fall. We had no idea where AR was going to go. Levis seemed like a lock to go to Indy, at least for like pre-draft rumors. So when AR went to Indy, I went into a puddle, literally in a blender, puddle of a man, an absolute blender. I love that landing spot for him. Absolutely love that landing spot for him. We've seen what Shane Steichen's done with Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, we didn't really go this in depth on rookies when he came out. It was our Jalen Hurts was a rookie on our like startup draft. Yep. But I don't remember him being like a too overly hyped rookie. Everyone knew he was super athletic and everything, but he wasn't like a clear cut top 5 pick, right? Where did Jalen Hurts even go in the NFL draft?
Went in the mid to late second round.
Yeah, so like
40s, 50s around there.
Right, maybe considered a project, and then Steichen turned this dude into now a top 5 dynasty quarterback. So this landing spot in Indy for AR is absolutely ideal. He's got a very good offensive line. Decent weapons around him with Michael Pittman, Austin or what's his name? The number 2 there, I forget. And
Alec Pierce.
Right, Alec Pierce. And then they drafted
Josh
Downs too. And then Jonathan Taylor, right? So he's got a good offensive line, pretty decent weapons around him, an unbelievable coach with a history of developing 2 quarterbacks who are now top 5 quarterbacks in Dynasty. That's something I got to consider. That's something I have to consider. I was in a blender when he went to Indy. Thought about it all weekend, and basically what I came down to is quarterback is king. This is Dynasty Superflex. Dynasty Superflex quarterback is king. Theoretically, right, I take AR and Bryce. I've now added the highest floor QB and the highest ceiling QB to Deshaun Watson. It's no coincidence that Two Pins does what they do every year, right? It's no coincidence they do what they do every year. They have the 2 best quarterbacks in the league. Now look at Simcoe's team, the floor he has with Hurts and Lamar. It's no secret that the best teams in this league have elite quarterbacks, and I can't say I have that yet, right? Deshaun is far from a sure thing. I love his upside. I do think he's a top 10 dynasty QB, but he hasn't proved it yet. So I'm far from those 2 elite quarterbacks. So that idea kind of crept into my head as soon as AR went to Indy, and then it just grew. It grew and grew and grew. Of the idea of taking 2 quarterbacks, going 2 QBs, adding the highest floor QB, the highest ceiling QB on top of Deshaun Watson, I feel like that gives me flexibility that I'm never going to have the shot at again. When am I going to have another shot at 1-1 and 1-2 or 1-3, the top 1 or 2 quarterbacks in this league? Probably never, as long as the division pans out, right? I'm more of the middle of the pack playoff team. Throughout this whole process, I've done everything I possibly can to trade for a top 5, top 6, 7 QB, going after guys like even from Burrow, Mahomes, Herbert to the middle tier guys like Lawrence. And it's impossible to trade for a QB in this league. It's impossible. Like we've done the learning curve. People know the idea with QBs now. It's impossible. So like you're either going to get him in the draft or you're not going to get him. And I don't think I'm going to ever have a shot again. So that idea kind of got into my head as soon as AR went to Indy, and it just kind of grew. Like you said, I think I trust that I can figure out RB2 and RB3 with the draft capital I have in 24 and 25. And it's no secret, RB has the shortest shelf life of the positions on our starting roster. So like, yeah, it sucks to pass on Bijan. It absolutely sucks. It's gut wrenching, actually. Had my eyes on him for 2 years. But at this moment in time, the draft's right now, I'm comfortable saying that I'm taking Bryce Young at the 1-1 and AR at the 1-2.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that I hadn't even considered, is that, how often are you in this position to get these types of quarterbacks? And we know that in these rookie drafts, it's very top loaded with the, kind of worthy quarterback prospects. And that doesn't always mean that if they're going at the top, then those are the only ones. And I do think that there are maybe some interesting ones we could talk about later on. But that is a good point, because it's like, think about how many good running backs we've seen go in that back half of the first round, even early second round. And, of course, right, Bijan's been compared to Zeke and Saquon and stuff like that. And yeah, those guys have been, when healthy, they've always been top 10, top 5, top 2 running backs. But think about how many guys also fill at that top 10 that aren't top 3 rookie draft picks and stuff like that, right? We've seen a lot of different pathways to running backs panning out, where with quarterbacks, sure, like a lot of guys can find success, but as you said, it's very hard to acquire these guys. So when you're in a position to do so, and you have that need, it kind of, you almost are obligated to do it. So it's like, yeah, it does stink to give up Bijan, and if he does go on to be this generational guy that we kind of expect, then that will hurt. But at the same time, I mean, if Anthony Richardson goes on to be a generational guy, I don't think you'll be regretting that decision. So like, my analogy for Anthony Richardson is, I almost think when we're talking floor, it's kind of like a house on stilts.
Yeah.
Because like the floor is actually up here,
The rush,
but you're still in a flood zone where, your entire property can be ruined with like one bad storm. And, I think that maybe applies more to like a fantasy aspect, but it's like, we just saw Justin Fields be a top 10 quarterback almost on his legs alone.
Right.
His throwing, his passing stats were very mediocre. He did almost all that by setting records on the ground. And, from what we've seen from Anthony Richardson, he's very capable of doing that. And then we also saw Jalen Hurts, like we're talking about with Steichen. It's like, we saw Jalen Hurts. He finished as QB9 when he was a starter 2 years ago. And that was with shaky passing. I mean, that whole time, his actual job in real life, not fantasy, but in real life, was in danger. They were talking about maybe we need to move on from him if we want to try and achieve big things like that. Steichen comes in, works with him, he cleans up that passing stuff, and he goes from QB9, which he did thanks in large part to his rushing, to improving that passing and being QB3. And he was a QB1 top fantasy player for the whole season pretty much, until he missed a couple games at the end with that injury. So it's like, we've just seen kind of that map be laid out for guys like Richardson. So if he can just make these little improvements with his passing, I think that he can be a huge fantasy beast. And I do think that the passing concerns are a little over concerned when people bring up, his completion percentage and things like that, because it is one of those where if you look at the tape, he's not playing with all pro receivers or anything like that. There are a lot of drops out there. It's not just his mistakes. It is college kids, receivers' mistakes, stuff like that as well. So I do think it's a little overblown. I do think, of course, there's always that fear with the inexperience. We saw what happened with Mitch Trubisky, but I think we're dealing with a much better prospect here. So with that situation, I think that it's just a money landing spot. And I think it maybe also helps that you also have Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman too.
Right.
So
right.
if Richardson does reach these heights, I think that those guys, what is it? Rising tides raises all ships, or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah. I like that.
It would be like that. If Richardson does meet the ceiling, then I think that makes your team in other positions way better as well. So I think it's worth considering. I think, like you said, it sounds like you're pretty much locked in on it. I think it's a good call.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I do have to say, like, I have to address what I said about AR in the last episode. Like, I ripped him apart. That was like, I had to come to terms with the fact that was me trying to convince myself that I didn't need him. Like, that's really what that was. But then at the same time, I also have to come to terms with right now and swallow it, that if AR is an absolute whiff, I got to come to terms with that and swallow that right now. Like, I'm going to pass on Bijan, take AR. If he's an absolute whiff in 2 years, then I just missed out on Bijan Robinson for nothing. So, like,
but,
that.
And I think what kind of helps that you can take that risk too, is that at the end of the day, you're hoping that, Deshaun Watson gets back to what he is. You hope that Bryce Young reaches these heights that you expect him to. So even if you miss on those, you got to hope that these two guys, at least you'll have 2 good quarterbacks to rely on as well. So It's not like you're totally screwed. Of course, you're going to, regret, missing out on Bijan or anything like that. But, you got to throw all caution to the wind and just say, fuck it. I see the ceiling that he has. I have to go for it in the Superflex. So, but I mean, so that really shakes things up. And, I think moving on, I think this gets Bowen into a position that he didn't really expect to be in. And
but not a bad one.
Yeah, and it's one of those. So what I kind of wrote in my notes is that, he made this big aggressive trade to move up to 3 with the intention of getting his quarterback. And, I think he's been pretty locked in on Richardson for a while now. And you're kind of in a sense, kind of taken him from him because it's felt like it was locked in with Bryce and Bijan. So he felt like he was locked in with Richardson. So, he maybe might feel a little sour towards that because it's one of those where it's like, you're like, there's no way this guy gets to me. I'm not going to get him. You start kind of game planning all around that. And all of a sudden it just falls apart. And I think that maybe, Bowen's getting the best consolation prize ever with having Bijan Robinson fall to him at 3. I have talked to Bowen about this a little bit just to kind of get his idea of like, hey, what are you doing? Because like I know you traded to get this quarterback. Are you going to go quarterback still? Do you like Stroud that much, or do you just take Bijan? I think that he's going to take Bijan no matter what. Whether he keeps him or not is to be determined. But I think that he knows it's in his best interest. Just grab this guy now. You can always flip him for something later. I mean, his value is still sky high. I mean, he was the 8th overall pick, right? So, I think that he knows it's in his best interest to just stick with it, take Bijan, figure it out later, whether it's keeping him long term or making a move on him. But what are you hearing? What do you think about Bowen taking this pick? Do you think that he's maybe missing out on that quarterback, but do you think you'll still be happy with this?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I'll say is you brought up that trade. I regret that trade. Like that needs to be said. I regret that trade. I think I learned not to make trades in January, February now. Ideally, like I have those 3 picks. I take Bryce, AR, Bijan. I don't have JT. I don't have Pitts. I still would have gone after Pitts and paid the same price I did for Pitts. But I do regret the trade as a whole because obviously right now I'm going to end up with Bryce and AR, and I could have had Bijan instead of JT, which I would take. I'd take Bijan over JT right now. So I do regret that trade, but it is what it is. We keep moving. With Bowen, yeah, I've been in constant contact with Bowen since AR went to Indy. I think at first he was a little sour because he did make the move for a quarterback, right? Now he's rolling with Geno and Kenny Pickett. Like, Geno's got a shot clock on him. I think Geno has a shot clock on him. Kenny Pickett seems like the guy in Pittsburgh, but certainly not a QB tandem that you can rely on to compete in this league. Like, just those 2 guys, your quarterbacks, kind of puts you out of the playoffs, I think. Maybe he's on the fringe, but like those 2 guys at quarterback gives you a very, very uphill battle trying to make the playoffs and going forward. It's also like something to be said, like, can he get a quarterback? Like we just talked about how difficult it is to get a quarterback in this league. It's not like he's got crazy draft capital. Like, when is he gonna make the move for a quarterback? So I do think that whole situation at QB kind of soured him. He did say things to me last year like he was sick of being in QB hell, and that's why he made the move to 1-3. Now he's not going to get a quarterback because he knows that he has to take Bijan. I mean, Bijan at 1-3 is incredible value. But I know for a fact, because I've tried to do it, flipping Bijan for a quarterback is not happening. It's not happening. I tried for almost everyone, and it's not happening. So maybe he goes into the league once people see it. Maybe they make a move for a quarterback. But yeah, I think Bowen knows he has to take Bijan. It is the best consolation prize in the history of rookie prospects, probably. But it puts him in a real tough quarterback situation. And I don't know. I mean, it's great. Bijan's going to be Bijan, but it puts him in QB hell still, even though he made this huge move to get out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of exactly what I was thinking. I was going to revisit that point that you already brought back up, but when is he going to be in this position again? So, he does get this and, he gets loaded up at running back, right? This gives him Bijan. It gives him Josh Jacobs. He's got Aaron Jones. He's got all those receivers, but still he's going to be stuck in that position with the quarterbacks. And, it does feel like Geno's numbers or days are numbered a little bit with that contract. I know that he's got at least this year. I mean, he did kind of win the draft with them not drafting anybody new. But it's a 3-year deal. He is getting up there in age. This was like one resurgent season. So we will have to see with all that. He has been blessed with those weapons in Seattle as well, too. But yeah, it's like, Pickett just kind of feels like that QB2 kind of floater. It might be, QB12 one year, QB20 the next year. That just kind of feels like where he's always going to be.
Right.
And then when Geno, yeah, he did put up that top 10 season. I think that he can continue to do that for as long as he's the starter, but it's just a question of how much longer that's going to be. And then I think, does he only have Stafford? Is that his only other quarterback that's left on that roster? So it's like he's in a tough spot with that, but he is pretty loaded up at all these weapons that maybe he can finagle something to land one of these quarterbacks. But as you said, speaking from your experience, it's very tough to do that. So and I think we might have talked about it on the last one. It might have just been a conversation we've had offline, but they do say the cheapest time to buy a quarterback is in the rookie draft, because if he's any cheaper after that, he probably stinks. And if he's any good, his value is going to shoot right up. So, it's a tough consolation prize, but I think that he's got enough tools to try and figure some things out. He did add some extra depth when he traded away Tyreek. So, it'll be interesting to see how he can kind of maneuver through this. But I don't think there's too much more to say about it because I think it is
One
just
more
locked and
like
loaded. If Bijan's there, he's going to draft him.
one more point I'll make on it is like I did float the idea of swapping 2 and 3 to Bowen,
Yeah.
but he wasn't interested, which I kind of was surprised on. Like this isn't something that I'm like. I mean, I had a 2 year stance on Bijan and Bryce, and I just flipped it last week. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel comfortable saying if the draft's right now, I'm taking Bryce and AR, and I feel great about that. But it's something I flipped last week, so like I thought he would at least entertain the idea of swapping 2 and 3 because, like we said, like when is he going to be in this situation again? But he wasn't interested. The best I got was Kenneth Gainwell. So yeah, that's the best I got. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not worried about it. I got my guys as the luxury of having 1-1 and 1-2. But yeah, I left that door open and he closed it. So it feels like those three are locked in. Unless something crazy happens, but that's locked in, those three.
All right, so moving on, we got the most athletic Suns at 4 overall, and this one's a little tough to pick because like they really do have needs at all positions. They could go quarterback here if they really like Stroud, but I don't think that quarterback is an immediate need of theirs. Dak Prescott is there in Dallas, and then of course Goff kind of had a little bit of a comeback season, I think, or maybe like a career resurgence in Detroit. I think there are those concerns about Goff being replaced down the line. Of course, that the Lions, they did draft Hendon. That's a guy we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think that he's okay at quarterback for now. I think that they can kind of figure that out and find that QB3 and then maybe a replacement QB2 for Goff somewhere. But right now, I think that they just got to kind of go best player available. And I think that, they could go receiver here if they really like JSN. But I do think that things have kind of evened out with the perception of those top 4 receivers. I think that right now, the player that we want to talk about is Jahmyr Gibbs, that running back, Detroit. I think the big thing is that move to get him is just so aggressive that you have to be all in on him. I mean, the 12th overall pick, he only went 4 picks before Bijan. I don't have the list on hand right now, but I believe it's only been in the last 10 years, maybe 6 running backs that have better draft capital. And we're talking Gurley, Bijan,
Best of the best.
Barkley, Zeke, Fournette, and Christian McCaffrey, I believe, are all the names. And so Jahmyr Gibbs is on that list as far as being a top 12 pick. You have to respect it. DeAndre Swift is out in Detroit. It sounds like, Swift, he wasn't a Campbell guy, right? He was brought in during the Patricia regime. I think that maybe they feel that Jahmyr can come in and maybe serve in that role a little bit better, maybe take on more of a lead back role than Swift was able to do. So right now, I mean, that 112 overall pick, you got to take him at 4 because he's not going to be there when the Suns are picking again at 7. They do need a running back there because they have ETN. And of course, when you look at it and you skim down the rush, you say, oh, they look all right at running back because they also have Kamara, they got James Conner, Cordell Patterson, but Kamara's got that 6-game suspension looming. That's going to be coming at the start of next year. He's getting a little bit older. He maybe wasn't looking as dominant in the second half of last season. Of course, James Conner continues to get older. Patterson is getting older, and who knows if he's even going to be on the Falcons. He could be a cut candidate at some point, but they did just bring Bijan in, and you got to expect Bijan to dominate those touches. So, he did get a lot weaker over the offseason at running back just from simple aging and moving on a year. So go out, get Gibbs, pair him with ETN, and you have yourself a very good young running back duo. What do you got here at 1-4 for the most athletic Suns?
Yeah, I think it's a good mock. I think they're going to take Gibbs. I back pretty much every point you said there. I still have JSN over Gibbs on my big board, just because I like JSN as a player so much, and I do like his landing spot in Seattle, even though Lockett and DK are still there. I do like Jason's landing spot in Seattle, so I still have Jason on my draft board over Gibbs. I obviously lean wide receiver over running back most of the time, like we've talked about. But I think the need at running back here, and in combination with the draft capital, like you get that draft capital, that's insane. Like no one had Gibbs going that high. I heard late first round going into draft night, and then for him to go that high, not only that, but it said the Lions were like super, super high on him. Like they would have gone, like I think I saw a room they were traded up for him if they needed to. They love
Yeah,
this guy.
they were talking about how if they felt like they had to take him at 6, like he wasn't going to be there for any of their next picks, I think that they would have taken him at 6.
Right.
And that's why they made that move up to 12. I actually heard that they were making that move because they heard that the Pats were interested in him.
Yeah. So like
they moved up to 12 to take him.
They clearly love him. They're going to use him. You don't get a running back that high and not use him. Swift getting traded was clearly always the plan. So I think the draft capital here warrants it. I'm okay with them taking him over JSN, and That feels good to me.
Yeah, and I think it helps that they have that pick a few slots later. So, one JSN, I think it plays out that he might actually be able to fall to them. But also,
Good.
I do think that it's close enough. These receivers, I rank them close enough that it's worth maybe going down one or two guys on the big board if it means that you can get Jahmyr Gibbs, especially because of the I think the gap in talent after him, just based off of landing spot, draft capital, etc. But at running back in this draft, I think that you got
Yeah.
to just get aggressive for that running back, take him now because he's not going to be there at 7, and
And then
and you have that need. So
you make a good point about like there's still going to be a wide receiver there at 7. If you look at who's the next running back off the board after Gibbs, it falls off heavy. Like it falls off very heavily. The running backs after Gibbs did not have great landing spots, in my opinion, and they dropped down on my big board. So like you just look at the flow, like you make a good point. They have 4 and 7. It makes sense to get that top running back at 4 and then end up with either probably their wide receiver 1 or 2 or 3 at 7.
Yeah. All right. At 5, we have Wallace. I love my mom. This is a team, I think this is a team that's very close to competing, and they really only have one immediate need. I think that they can still add to running back, they can still add to receiver, but they need a QB2 desperately. They just acquired who did I just trade him? Oh, Gardner Minshew, right? But you just got Gardner. He has Zach Wilson. That's his other quarterback. But he needs somebody to pair with Trevor Lawrence. So if he's a Stroud guy, it should be, I think this is as ideal as it gets for him. So I think that he goes for Stroud here. One thing I had sent to you earlier, I do think it's something to be wary of. But when you look at the history of quarterbacks that have gone 1 and 2 in the draft, I went back and I fact checked this myself, but I went back 25 years. I went all the way back to 1998, and there has been 6 instances of quarterbacks going 1 and 2 in the draft. Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf, Tim Couch and Donovan McNabb, Andrew Luck and RG3, Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. Now, that's pretty significant. That's pretty striking. 6 and 25 drafts. There have been two quarterbacks that go 1 and 2 at the top of the draft, and we don't have a 100% hit rate for any of these drafts. I mean, we're talking, it's almost always the first quarterback that goes. The second quarterback seems to almost, be the bomb, except for Donovan McNabb over Tim Couch. But, it is just something weird. That's a weird trend to me. It does make you think about things. But it's also like, there have been instances where, the quarterback goes 3 and, it's really that big of a difference. But, I do get scared about patterns like that. What are your thoughts on Stroud? Because I know that last year you were a big Stroud guy, and then it seems like, as that season went on, your interest kind of waned a little bit. Where are you at on him now? And, do you have maybe any feel for where Wallace is looking with this pick?
Yeah, I guess I've looked into these quarterbacks a ton, obviously, with my situation. I don't feel good about the landing spot in Houston. New quarterback or new head coach in D'Amico Ryans. That's a totally defensive minded guy. Their offensive coordinator, I think, is the passing game coordinator for San Francisco the last couple of years. Totally new guy.
Yeah.
I don't even know his name, but there's no history of developing rookie quarterbacks there. And they also kind of screwed themselves trading their 2024 pick. Like they don't have a ton of capital to put now pieces around him. That existing weapons in Houston aren't great. The offensive line's not great besides Laramie Tunsil. So like there's just not a lot around Stroud for me to move him up from a situation where I didn't really like him to begin with. Like that Georgia tape is probably the best quarterback performance in college football last year. But outside that, I just didn't like him. I talked to him. I talked a lot about him in other episodes, but always goes to his first or second read. I don't see him move through progressions. I do think he's the best natural passer in this class. I put that in my blurb on the Big Board blog. But I just don't love the landing spot. I don't love the player. I mean, that said, like he's a QB that went 1-2 in the NFL draft and Dynasty Fantasy Football. So I still got him at number 4 on my big board. I think Nick is delighted to have him at 1-5. Like there's no shot. I don't think he had any idea he would get Stroud in that situation. So I think he loves it. I think it's pretty much a lock. He does take Stroud. I don't see how he passes on him for like Hooker or Levis. So I think Nick definitely takes him. I just don't like the player. I don't like the landing spot. I'm just not that high on him.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And, as a Nico Collins owner, I'm pretty pumped up that they didn't bring in, really any competition. Of course,
Nico won the draft.
What's that? He's the winner of the draft,
Nico was
right?
the winner of the draft. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, sure, they brought in Robert Woods, but like, I watched a lot of
Yeah,
Tennessee
whatever.
games last year. That does not concern me at all. And I do think that John Mechie will be very good as long as he can come back and continue to be healthy on the field. I mean, I don't think that it's not, we're not talking about like a hamstring issue or something. He
Right.
dealt with the cancer, he beat it, he's back. So it's all about, did he lose anything in that year off? Is he going to be able to come back, be strong? But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good spot for Nico Collins. I'm pretty pumped about that, especially with no first rounder next year. That kind of takes away the ability to add more, significant competition. Of course,
Marvin.
I'm sure they have a second rounder or something, but I'm pretty pumped up. They did bring in Tank Dell.
Yep.
That could
That's
be an
it. They
interesting
bring
little
Tank
player
Dell.
for them. But of course, he's got his size concerns as far as that goes. But yeah, I'm interested to see how this offense actually goes. I do think that they're committed to Stroud. I do think that Houston's working on something and they're going to be able to turn this around. I'm a believer in D'Amico Ryans.
Okay.
But I do think it's going to take some time, and it's just going to be interesting to see because I do think people get that rookie fever and they forget, how many of these guys came in and they were one of the top quarterbacks. And it's like, oh my God. I mean, remember Carson Wentz when he was, a rookie in Philly and, he was putting up that MVP season and all that stuff. So it's
RG3.
like, I mean, even all these guys that I read off the list, these 1 and 2 guys, I mean, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Winston and Mariota, Zach Wilson had all that hype, all that stuff. So it's like,
Trey
we've seen
Lance,
guys
even
come in all
Riley.
the time, seem like they were like too big to fail, and they did fall flat on their face. So I haven't been a big Stroud guy, historically. I think there's a lot of receipts to prove that, but I do think that he can be that safe option. I don't know how well it translates to fantasy, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not rushing. That's one of those guys where if all of a sudden he fell to me, I'd be like, fuck, like I have to take him, but like I
Yeah.
don't want to take him.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that's the spot Nick's in.
yeah, exactly. So he needs that quarterback bad. I don't think he has much of a choice. And I mean, it's kind of like my argument for Quentin Johnson, who we're about to get to, but it's one of those where everybody looks at the red flags, they do ignore the upside. So Stroud does have that upside. He is a very good natural passer, so I think that he's capable of figuring it out. But I do think it'll be tough for him. But moving on, as I just said his name, so we've got McMorrow, Carson Wentz, pick 106. Now, this was just kind of a hot tip that I picked up. Obviously, JSN is the number 1 wide receiver on my board. But something, a little birdie told me, I'm getting this weird feeling that McMorrow could be leaning Quentin Johnston from the Chargers at this 106 pick. He does have a need at receiver. Obviously, he would like to get a running back as well, but I don't think that that's really going to be an option here. And I don't think he's reaching for a quarterback here either. So I think he goes with Johnson. It sounds like that could be his wide receiver 1. And I think that we can kind of get into some general wide receiver talk and maybe move through this list because I got a little list of wide receivers coming now. But Johnson was a guy where, I was saying last on the mock draft that I'm willing to bet on that upside now just because the public seemed to be so against him. And I said that in the big board as well, where, and as I just said about Stroud, where everybody's looking at those red flags, the body catches, the drop percentage, all that stuff. And nobody's focusing on, he's got the size, he has the athleticism, he is very capable of turning into a beast. And I really, really, really like this Chargers landing spot for him because one, I think that the opportunity can present itself pretty fast. I think that one, he's capable of actually being in 3 wide receiver sets here and being productive with all these guys on the field. 2, the 2 wide receivers ahead of him are very injury prone. We've seen Keenan Allen always pull a muscle or something like that. Mike Williams always seems to be playing hurt if he's not missing games. And, Keenan Allen was a potential cut candidate this year. I think that the writing's on the wall. He's not going to be a Charger for too long, whether that's his own retirement or eventually they just move on from him for contractual reasons. But then Mike Williams, I think he's got 1 more year left on his deal as well. And he's 30. I think Mike Williams is like sneaky old. So it's like, I think that he can, move in and take over that wide receiver room very quickly. We're talking like a year or 2, if not right away, because he is, that talented. I think he has that potential. So I really like this. I like the fact that he's tied to Herbert for, as long as they want to be. So I think it's a great landing spot. I see the vision with him. I do believe in that talent. So I think that if you're a Quentin Johnson guy, you should be pretty pumped up about him. And I actually don't think it's that ridiculous if you like him to take him as the first receiver off the board. Pete, I know you had a lot of things to say about him when we were doing our big boards, but I do think that you were somebody that came around on this landing spot. So what are your thoughts right now on Johnson? And as the McMorrow whisperer, what are you kind of hearing from that camp?
Yeah, I guess from a McMurrow perspective, I think it's 50-50 with him for QJ and JSN. He's mentioned both names to me. I'm not sure how he felt. I mean, that's how he felt pre-draft. I don't know how he feels post-draft. Pre-draft, he said JSN was the dream pick. So I don't know how he feels post-draft, but I think it's 50-50 JSN and QJ for him. And then even the next pick, like it's almost like the Suns at 1-7 get whoever McMorrow doesn't take, right? So like these guys went 20 and 21, I think, in the first round in the NFL draft,
Yes.
back to back. So exact same draft capital. And I expect them to go back to back here in our draft at 6 and 7. And they're actually in similar situations. Like you have DK and Lockett ahead of JSN in Seattle, and then you've got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams ahead of QJ in San Diego, or no, Vegas. No, LA.
LA.
Whoa,
Yes.
whoa, whoa, LA. But yeah, I love QJ, and I gotta follow in the store. Like I ripped him apart in the blurb. I said he stinks. I said I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, even with a condom. I still had him at 11 on my big board, so like it's not like I didn't like the guy. But I moved him up to 8 on my big board post draft, head of Zay Flowers actually, which we'll get to eventually as well. But I love the landing spot, and you went through that list and you mentioned Justin Herbert last. I would have put Justin Herbert first. That's the first reason why I love QJ. He's tied to Justin Herbert, right? He's got the better QB, the better offense, the better team. Well, maybe not the better team, but or better offense, but he's got Justin Herbert. So like that's huge for me. He got the draft capital as JSN did. He's in a great landing spot. Those two dudes are old. You just mentioned it. I still have my concerns about the tape. I still have my concerns about the body catches. I still had him at wide receiver 11 on my big board. Now he's 8. I can see him going before JSN or right after. It's going to happen in our draft, and it's pretty much up to preference, I think.
Yeah, what I like too is that they just brought in Kellen Moore to be the new offensive coordinator, and I
Yeah.
think he wants to throw a lot.
Yep.
And I think that one thing that I had heard when the Cowboys and he moved on from each other was that him and Mike McCarthy were butting heads because Kellen Moore basically wanted to score too much. And Mike McCarthy kind of believes in the philosophy of like, maybe holding back a little bit, running a little bit more clock, and maybe wasting time with the lead is a little bit more valuable than just scoring points. I don't necessarily agree with that, though I can see where he's coming from. But, I think that if you're somebody that's investing in the Chargers, that's something that you want to hear about your new offensive coordinators, that he wants to score a ton. So I think that they're going to throw it a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities year 1. And I think that in years 2 and 3, he can really, blow up. So, I like the landing spot. Like I said, I still have JSN as my wide receiver 1. And I agree with what you said, where I think that no matter what, it's going to be JSN and QJ at this 1-6, then 1-7. So next up, we do have the most athletic Suns, and they would then be getting Jackson Smith into Jigba. I like the landing spot. I do think that the draft capital was a little underwhelming. There were maybe some thoughts that he could sneak into the top 10, but at least be early teens, maybe go to the Patriots. There was maybe speculation that the Packers traded and jumped us in that Aaron Rodgers trade so they could get JSN. So I think that him falling to 20, it might have left some people underwhelmed. And I think that they might also be a little bit underwhelmed by the landing spot as well. But, we say it all the time on the show, you got to trust the talent over the situation. And I think that if you're looking at it and you're saying, well, okay, there's DK there, there's Lockett there, they got this backfield. I think that that's kind of an outdated way of thinking, right? We've seen time and time again that offenses can support 2 really good top 15 receiving options. And even if it's not that, we can get 1 in the top 12 and then 1 in the top 25. There's going to be plenty of opportunity there. And, Tyler Lockett's not going to be around forever. He's 30, 31. He's getting older and older. And he doesn't, JSN doesn't even play really the same roles as these guys in the offense. Like he's going to be taking the slot. He's going to be working the inside. So it's not like they're all eating into each other's targets. If he's getting open, he's going to get the ball. DK plays on the outside. We've seen Pete Carroll produce other receivers as well. We've seen Doug Baldwin, we've seen Golden Tate. It seems like they always have 2 guys on their offense. So even when they're so dedicated to the run, everybody always associates that, oh, Pete Carroll, he wants to pound the rock, but they've still produced really good fantasy wide receivers. So, teams that run the ball a lot, they still have to pass. I mean, even last year we saw with the Falcons, Drake London, when they were throwing it and then things were working, he was putting up massive, massive numbers. And that was with a team that was running at, high rates. So, I don't worry too much about that situation. I think that'll sort itself out. I think JSN, I trust the talent there. I think he's very good. So, I think if you're the Suns and you're considering taking him at 4 to get Gibbs and then have him fall to you all the way at 7, I think that's pretty much a blessing too. You kind of got into it with JSN. I don't know if you have anything more to add here for the Suns.
I would just say I had it written down here, DK and Lockett, top 17 wide receiver. DK the last 3 years, Lockett the last 5 years. So this, I mean, sure, most of that was with Russ, but we saw it last year. DK was wide receiver 16. Lockett was right around the same thing. with Geno. So like the offense can support 2 wide receivers. The only thing I would say is Lockett did just sign that contract. He's locked up through 2025. So like it's not like you're betting on JSN taking over, like sliding into that spot. You're more betting on him taking over the role because he's better, right?
Yeah.
Like Lockett's 30-31. You're betting on JSN being the better player, taking over that target share from Lockett. Whether in the situation with QJ, it's like Mike Williams has only got 1 more year left on his deal. Keenan Allen's 30. So like I think the opportunity looks a little bit better with QJ, but with JSN, you know, we've said it many times. We like him because of the player who he is. You're betting he's taking over that role and getting a target share.
Yep, exactly. All right, moving on. We got the Slow Stroke Kings. We have another receiver coming off the board. We got Jordan Addison from Minnesota. So, you know, speaking as the owner of the Slow Stroke Kings, I traded that Tyreek Hill. I traded Tyreek Hill to get this pick. To get Tyreek Hill, I traded Pickens. I traded Ayuk. I'm clearly going to go receiver here. So I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty comfortable with any of the receiving options in that top 4. So however that shakes out, I mean, if McMorrow or Angelo, they were to take Addison, I would gladly take whoever that felt to me there. I also like Zay Flowers, but I'm an Addison guy. I've been tooting Addison's horn for I think a year and a half now. I was really pumped about him going to USC. And, while I think he was, he was objectively better at Pitt, but that was when he was supposed to be the star of the show and everything. I don't think he was properly used at USC. I really like this Minnesota landing spot. And, I think of the 4 receivers, I think that his ceiling is capped. I'd say it's probably capped the most, just in the sense that he's, in a receiving room with
the best
what could be the greatest receiver of all time. We will see. But he's very well on his way to do that. So, that's not always ideal. But again, as I mentioned before, we have seen time and time again that 2 wide receivers can thrive, and I really like Addison. And we've seen Minnesota, whether it was Diggs and Thielen, whether it was Thielen and Jefferson, Kevin O'Connell, or is it O'Connell or O'Connor? O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell came over from LA, where we saw them, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. We know that this franchise and this head coach can make 2 receivers work, and I think they're going to work really well together. Maybe Addison's not going to be that top 5. He's not going to be the Justin Jefferson, that Jamar Chase, but maybe he can be that T. Higgins to that Justin Jefferson, or anybody else. I mean, we could name a million duos right now that have been 2 wide receiver ones or a fringe wide receiver one, anything like that. So I really love Addison as the receiver. Of course, ceiling wise, it's not ideal to have him go compete with Justin Jefferson, but I think that this is one where Jefferson's going to get a ton of opportunity there. I think this will open things up for him. I think Jefferson being out there will open things up a ton for Addison. He's good at finding those holes in the defense. He's going to get open. He's got great hands. He's going to make plays. So Addison, he's my wide receiver 2 on the board. So to have him come to me, be the 3rd receiver off the board at 8, I'd be pretty pumped about that. You got any thoughts on Addison? You got any thoughts on my team going receiver here? I think that's the right move, but maybe you disagree.
No, I think it's the right move. Had you going wide receiver, I like you going wide receiver. It seems like it was written in the stars after that trade. I still got Addison as my number 2 wide receiver ahead of QJ, just because of the player. I think he's a more polished route runner. I think he's a more natural catcher. He's sliding straight into the wide receiver 2 spot, a great offensive offense. And it doesn't scare me that he's with Justin Jefferson. Like, he's not going to be Justin Jefferson, but like you just said, there's T. Higgins, there's Devonta Smith, there's Jalen Waddle. There's no surprise that a wide receiver 2 can thrive in an offense with a dominant wide receiver 1. I like the pick. I stick by it. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, I think I've made it clear that it's kind of my objective to just build around those wide receivers. And I do like Elijah Moore and Nico Collins as like interesting depth options. Yep. But I want a stronger wide receiver 4 there, because I would like to go 4 starting receivers. So to add that, I feel very comfortable with London, with Burks, with Watson. To add Jordan Addison to that, and then to have Nico and Elijah Moore, hopefully they can, break out or reestablish themselves in Elijah Moore's case in this next year. And that gives me some really good depth at receiver. I'd be very comfortable with that. Moving on, 1-9, go Tigers. I think this is probably the hardest pick for me to mock in this draft, where, with the Suns, it was kind of tough just because they could go in so many different directions. Here, I just don't really know what Mikey wants. He has a huge need at running back. He has Najee Harris at running back. I do think he's going to bounce back a little bit this year. I still think it's a very good fantasy option. Behind him, he's got Elijah Mitchell, who has shown running back 1 potential, but now he's stuck behind Christian McCaffrey. Of course, with McCaffrey's injury issues, he could quickly step back into a starting role, but until now, he's, maybe like a streaming option when, during bye weeks, but to have him be your RB2 with guys like Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, Darrell Henderson on your bench, that's not good. So he has a huge, huge, huge need at running back. So I haven't taken Zach Charbonnet. I just don't know if that's the pick here. To me, Charbonnet, he was my RB2 pre-draft. I can admit that was maybe a little hot takey, but I do really like Charbonnet as the prospect. So I just kind of wanted to drive that point home. I can understand the hesitancy with that landing spot. I mean, we talk about running backs having all the success, but it is a lot tougher in a running back as a running back in a backfield when you have Ken Walker, who just put up 1,000 yards as a rookie. That you're going to be competing with. I do think that the Seahawks, they like to establish that run game. That is a very significant investment. I think it was like the 52nd overall pick. That's second round draft capital. It's really good for a running back. They're going to use him. It just makes you wonder, how capped his ceiling is as a running back. But, they could go best player available here. Maybe as a Flowers. Maybe they go Kincaid if they really want to address that tight end need or something like that. But, right now, I think that they need a running back bad. They don't have any other picks in this draft. It's going to be tough for them to acquire running backs. Like their war chest is pretty limited as far as trying to make a move for one. So I think here you got to trust that Charbonnet talent, and you got to take him here, even if it's hold your nose and just pick it or something. But yeah, I got Charbonnet here. What do you think? I don't know if you have any insight on Mikey or any takes on Charbonnet.
No insight on Mikey, but I probably wouldn't have gone running back here. I mean, the need screams it for him. Like the need screams it for him. It's easily the hardest pick to mock because he could literally do anything. But this team is ready to go. It's been in the finals 2 years ago and made the playoffs last year. I think Mikey's still like a lock to win the Gabagool division. He does need to address running back though. I just think he does it a different way. Like best player available is definitely Zay Flowers. And then even Kincaid behind him. Like these running backs just fell to horrible spots. Like it's not like you have Bijan who went 1-8 and is now in like competition with Tyler Algier. Like Tyler Algier is not going to be a threat to Bijan's carry share. But Charbonnet like kind of went in the same spot as Walker, right? What was draft capital to Walker get last year?
I could find that. I mean, it was a second round.
Hold on to that, but like Walker still got 3 years on his rookie contract. This is going to be a running back by committee for at least 3 years. I don't think you're going to see one or the other take over. Like it's going to be 50-50 unless barring injury. So, and then you look at past Charbonnet, like the running backs, Tajay Spears, he's sitting behind Derrick Henry now. Kendre Miller, he's sitting behind Alvin Kamara. And then the only other real guy I could see him take it is maybe he reaches on a guy like Devin Achane, or A-Chain, who could be that RB1 in Miami. He might love the landing spot there. Maybe he reaches for a guy like that, but I think he goes best player available, takes Zay Flowers, and then either looks to move him. Like the thought that went to my head was like Mikey's team's ready to go. Maybe he goes after a running back on the McMorrow roster, like Henry or Cook, and gives him Zay Flowers, where McMorrow has a very deep need at wide receiver, right? So it's a very flexible pick, super hard to mock. I could see Mikey doing a ton of different things. But I guess I would say it would either be Flowers, Charbonnet, or Kincaid.
Yeah, and that was something I was juggling back and forth with too, because I could definitely see them going best player available, just going with Flowers there because they're not totally set at receiver. I mean, they have Jefferson, they have Higgins as that 1 and 2. They got Godwin, they got Hollywood as well, but those are two guys that have dealt with injuries on their own. Behind that, it's Mooney, and then I don't think they really have anybody else. So it's not like they're exactly set at receiver, so they can still go a receiver here, maybe go best player available with Zay Flowers and take them. But yeah, right now I just have them addressing that need because until then they just got to figure it out somehow. Right. So right now this seems to be their only viable option. Right. If they do draft Flowers, that does open the trade market a little bit for them. So would be interesting to see. And like I said, I think this is by far the toughest slot to predict. And having that 8 and then having that 10 and 11, it's been driving me nuts trying to figure out exactly who's going to be there in that one pick off. But right now, I mean, honestly, I don't think that where Mikey's going with that pick would affect me too much at this 10 and 11, just based on what I'm trying to do. These two picks, they could go in any order, but at 10, I have myself, the Slow Stroke Kings, taking Will Levis. It's been no question that I'm trying to get a third quarterback. I do feel very confident in Tua, but of course, there's always that injury concern with him. And then with Mac Jones as well, I just need to see him take that step up. And I'm really hoping that he does this year. Bill O'Brien, everything like that. I think this is a big year for him, but I need him to take that step up. Until then, I can't feel totally comfortable at quarterback. So with Levis, it's tough because, you know, you never like to see a guy drop like that. He was getting top 5 hype, second overall hype. All of a sudden he falls all the way into the second round. One thing though that I do find interesting, and this is actually something I'll talk about with Hendon in a second as well, though, is that when you sure the second round draft capital doesn't look great, but with the context, it does change it a little bit. I mean, he only went one pick later than Lamar Jackson went. Of course, you know, it's not always the best way to prove a point is to bring up outliers, but he only went one pick behind where Lamar Jackson went. And Tennessee was trying to trade back into the first round, you know, at the end of that, at the end of Thursday night. So, you know, he easily could have been a first round pick on that first round draft capital. To me, him going in the early second versus the late first doesn't make any difference to me. He slid anyways. There are those risks, but I really like this Tennessee landing spot. I mean, first of all, I think a perfect comparison is the fact that he's coming in to potentially replace Ryan Tannehill, who seemed like he was dead when he was on the Dolphins. He goes to Tennessee, was backing up Marcus Mariota, and Mike Vrabel and the Titans, they kind of revived his career and they made him into a pretty viable starter for the last, half decade, maybe a little bit longer than that. So I really like that from a team and situational standpoint where there's no rush for him to come in and start. He can learn, he can kind of figure out those kinks. And if he can play like he did 2 years ago, as opposed to last year where, you know, he had a really depleted roster, seemed like he was playing really hurt. You know, I'm willing to throw that tape out if he can get healthy and kind of show what, you know, he's capable of and what made him, you know, such a top prospect. So I really like this Tannehill spot. You know, I can't lie. I'm attracted to the idea of him and Treylon Burks as a stack for me in the future. And, you know, for a guy that needed a quarterback, you know, a lot of people, I think, were expecting me to take Hendon here, but, you know, I think that having Levis fall like that, who I did have ranked ahead of Hendon anyways, and then, you know, with Hendon's draft capital falling a little bit, and, you know, I like the Detroit spot, but I don't love the Detroit spot. So I think Levis is the pick here for me. What do you think about Levis falling to me here at 10? What do you think about me scooping him up here, Pete?
Yeah, at first I just with Kincaid, I love Kincaid's landing spot in Buffalo. Gabe Davis has one more year on his contract. He hasn't proved that he's like a huge threat for target share in that offense anyway. I love the Kincaid landing spot. I think he absolutely warrants getting taken at 110, being the only first round tight end when there was rumored to have like 3 of them go in the first round. So yeah, I love that pick. Just to say that first with Levis, I mean, I'm an expert on the Tennessee Titans quarterback room. I'm an expert on the Tennessee Titans quarterback room. Shout out Malik.
Yeah.
You could say Malik lost the draft. I'd spin zone it and say this is just going to push him to another team to get his opportunity. Regardless, it's no secret Tennessee is off of Ryan Tannehill. The reason I say I'm an expert on the draft or the quarterback room there is he's a $36 million cap hit this year. So like they kind of always were either going to trade him or roll with him in this year and then cut him. Next year, it drops down to a $9.2 million cap hit, which is not that significant. This just feels like they're going to have him be the bridge QB for 1 year, and Levis gets a shot to start next year, if not this year, later down the road. I don't really expect this team to be a playoff team. They did not look good at the end of last year. I don't love any pieces they've added. It was even rumored Derrick Henry was going to get traded. Like it just feels like this roster is turning over. And I think like, you know, with the cap hit of 9.2 next year, it seems like Levis is going to get a shot next year. So I like the pick here with Levis. And I don't really get scared of the second round draft capital either. Indy came out and said if AR wasn't there at the 4th pick, they would have taken him there. And then we're having a completely different conversation, right? Maybe we're even debating Levis over Stroud now. So like the draft capital isn't a huge deal for me. He clearly was thought of as a prospect that could go top 10, which says enough. I just think he kind of got screwed. Like there was so many teams after the top 3 quarterbacks went that just didn't need a quarterback. Like they just didn't need it. So, yeah, I like the landing spot for him. I think he's gonna get his opportunity before a guy like Hendon. And I like the pick.
Yeah, I could see, speaking of the Tannehill situation, I could see it kind of being similar to Vegas last year with what they did with Carr, where,
Yep.
you know, they get to the end of the season, they realize that they're out of the playoff picture and they just kind of sit him and, you know, kind of part their ways and let Tannehill go and go play wherever he wants to play next year. But yeah, I like this path to a starting job for Levis. So I think that as a team that does have that need and trying to find that second or third quarterback, I think it's worth me taking a shot, and having a fall to me at, you know, at 10 or 11 is, you know, a great opportunity for me. And with Kincaid, I kind of feel the same way. I mean, you know, if Zay Flowers is still on the board here, you know, I could very well see myself going that direction as well. But I do, you know, I think I found some diamonds in the rough when it comes to Chig and Likely as waiver wire pickups, but they both still have a long ways. I mean, Likely more so than Chig. Chig was showing a lot last year, but
Yep.
they still have a long ways to go before they prove themselves as like weekly starting options that I can trust and be comfortable with. I like having them as depth pieces, and I think that they can really develop into something, but I still got to see that first. And Gesicki too, right? He's shown that top 10 ability, but he's also shown that he's in that tier where he could finish as tight end 6 or he could finish as tight end 26. And we know that from that position to that position, that could only be a difference of like 2 points. But clearly, he's in that non-elite tight end tier. Kincaid, he has an opportunity to be in that tier. I think that him being the only first round tight end, I think that the Bills getting aggressive and moving up to take him. It sounds like they were trying to, they heard that the Cowboys were going to go after him.
Yep.
So moving in and trying to take him at that spot, that's really important to me. And I think that also, I think you had mentioned it. Gabe Davis, he could be on a new team next year.
Yep.
Stephon Diggs, I mean, he's obviously still great, but he's
Right.
only getting older. And for me, Dawson Knox is not a huge threat. I don't think that he's been that great of a receiving option. And, sometimes he gets those big touchdowns for Josh Allen. He's good buddies with Josh Allen, but they're clearly making this move to get Kincaid for a reason. They do kind of use him as like that large slot role, and don't rely on him to be a blocker too much.
Yep.
I think that the sky's the limit for him in Buffalo. So, like I said, I like the tight ends that I have, but if I have an opportunity to try and get that what do you call it, that gap that you call that positional advantage, you say, with the tight ends.
Yeah.
So if I have an opportunity to get the positional advantage here with a late first round pick, I think it's worth it for me if I don't love what else is on the board. So I like Kincaid a lot, and I think that I'm filling out my roster a bit with these 3 picks. So I'm content with that. But moving on, we got the Vibers at 112. So in this mock, like we said, we could easily see Zay Flowers going off the board to Mikey at 9 overall. And it's weird because I look at it and I don't really know where else Zay Flowers would go, but I have a hard time seeing him go this late in the draft. And I know we were talking about it, and you don't love that Baltimore landing spot. I still do. Just before I pass it off to you, I do just want to mention, I was looking at Todd Monken. So they brought in Todd Monken. He's the new offensive coordinator in Baltimore, and he's been an offensive coordinator for 4 different seasons in the NFL. He's coming over from Georgia. They just won the national championship. But one thing that I found interesting was, like, when you look at the teams that he coached, Jameis Winston and Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, stuff like that. But he's coached two of those 4 seasons in the NFL. He's had the 3rd and the 4th most pass attempts, I believe. So to me, I'm looking at it, and I can understand if you're a little weary of that Baltimore landing spot, and you point out, how they haven't really been producing these top receivers like that. But I do think that there's a changing of the guard here. They fire Greg Roman, who likes to run that 12 personnel, throw the tight ends, run the ball, everything like that. And now they're bringing in a guy that likes to spread it out. He likes to go 5 wide, and they're starting to make this investment in receiver as well. They paid a lot of money to Odell. They were using first-round draft capital on Zay Flowers. Of course, they have Rashad Bateman, who I don't love, but that's a first-round receiver there as well. I think they're going to be looking to pass. They gave Lamar this huge contract. The big debate over that contract was the guaranteed money. He's getting a lot of guaranteed money, and I think they see that and they say, well, shit, if we just keep running him and he keeps getting hurt, we're going to lose out on that money. And I think that's a reason why they didn't want to pay him that. So I do think I wouldn't be surprised if we see Lamar try and stay in the pocket, throw a little bit more, spread the offense out, and really just let it rip. So I like Zay Flowers. I like how he plays. I do think, he's smaller and things like that. But as far as the landing spot goes, it doesn't concern me. I mean, I don't maybe love it as much as some of the other landing spots, but I think if you're a Zay Flowers guy, I think that you should still believe in that landing spot, and I think you should be comfortable with that. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities, but I know that you've been kind of anti-Zay Flowers after the draft.
Yeah, I do think the Monken thing is a good point, and one that I hadn't considered. Like, we were talking it offline. I guess like what I'm about to say here, I'm looking at the past in Baltimore. You're looking at the future. Like, Monken brings in an optimism for the passing game, so it's fair to say it's a good point. I was just like, my thing with Zay Flowers in the spot with landing spot in Baltimore, and I told you this, but Hollywood Brown, the only Baltimore receiver to have more than 800 yards in a season with Lamar at quarterback. He only did it once in 2021 with 1,008 yards. So he barely got over 1,000 yards. He did it once since Lamar's been quarterback. No other receiver's done it in the last 5 or 7 years, I think. And that year he finished wide receiver 23. So, like, basically what I'm saying is we've never seen a wide receiver do it in Baltimore with Lamar at quarterback. That's the bottom line there. Now you bring in OBJ, who's a veteran, not going to be that dominant wide receiver one he used to be, but still a veteran, very good wide receiver. And Bateman, who's got first round draft capital, which we haven't seen it from yet, but he's still another mouth in the room. And there's Mark Andrews, who's still the number one wide receiver in that team. Like in that offense, wide receiver one is Mark Andrews. That's pretty much how it is. So like I just haven't seen any wide receiver be fantasy relevant. I mean, wide receiver 23 out of Hollywood Brown, that's relevant, I guess. But outside him in that 1 year in 2021, there really isn't anyone else. So I hate the landing spot. And then on top of that, you got J.K. Dobbins healthy this year, and you've got Lamar at quarterback. He's rushes for 1,000 yards every year. Like 4 years ago, or 22 last 2 years, he only played 12 games. He still rushed for 700 yards. 2 years before that, 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards. Like that is a huge chunk out of the total offensive fantasy points to get in this offense. So everything in the history of Baltimore tells you that wide receivers don't succeed in this offense. And that's what I'm trusting. But like I said, Monken's a good point. Like you bring in the new OC, could be a new offense. Lamar's there for 5 years now, so maybe they reinvent this offense and it looks completely different. And you can throw away the past or at least look over it for how good of a prospect Zay Flowers is. Now, that said, I still love the player. I still have him at number 9 on my big board. Wide receiver 4, number 9 on my big board. The only thing that changed for me was QJ jumped him. QJ jumped him in those 2 spots on my big board. So it's not like I hate him as a player. I just really, really don't like the landing spot.
Yeah, and I think he definitely has, at least for now, probably the worst landing spot of those top 4.
Yeah.
Just kind of based off of all types of factors, but. Yeah, I think like we kind of covered. I'm looking ahead to the future. I believe in the change that I think they're going to bring. So, I mean, especially at this. I mean, if he's falling to you at 112, then you're no doubt taking him. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we still have him going later in the first round. He's not exactly skyrocketing up the big board either. So, I'm willing to take that risk, and I think that it will be interesting to see how they kind of navigate this offense with the new coordinator, with Lamar getting this huge contract, all this guaranteed money. I am curious to see if they still want to run him like they do, because they have been so afraid of that injury policy. So it's like, I mean, maybe they feel like if we peel it back a little bit, throw it a little bit more, that might be better for our, better bang for our buck or whatever. All right, final pick of the first round, compensatory pick. Put that shit on. I got Amaral taking his boy, and I'm going to take a shot at this name. I believe it's Devon Achane. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Amaral, when he came on here and we were doing our last mock draft, he's saying, that was a player that he threw out there as somebody that we hadn't covered in the first round. I know he loves him. I know he loves this Miami landing spot. And if you're an A-chain guy, you should love this Miami landing spot. He's fast as hell. We've seen what speed does in that offense. They do, they're not set at running back. I mean, we saw, what they did with Jeff Wilson and what they did with Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert, especially, is a guy that's fast as hell. So if A-Chain can come in there and kind of serve in that same role, he could really pop off for some crazy games. I don't know if I believe in him as like a full-time, starter in that role. I saw Nyheim Hines comparison for him. I think that could be pretty accurate. I think he could have his good seasons. He could have his bad seasons. Kind of like James White. I mean, James White put up a lot of like RB30 seasons. He did pop off for an RB6 season once. I could see kind of a similar role to that where, hey, maybe he works in as that receiving back, but I do think speed kills in this offense. He's got plenty of it. So I know, that's a great landing spot for him, and I know that Amaral loves him. So I got him taking him here. I also feel like we kind of get into an iffy spot where, I think after this top like 12 or 13, you could really argue that the talent really falls off. So, we're kind of grasping at straws here, but I think Amaral loves A-Chain. He's got a need at running back. He's really going to need anywhere. So he's just going to take the best player available. And I think that this is, who he's going to have at the top of his board. What are you thinking at 13, Pete?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, getting this deep is kind of like just rely on best player available. I do love the landing spot with Devon Achane. I think that's definitely how you say it. I did not have him super high on my big board. I had him behind guys like Abanikanda, Roshan Johnson, Kendrick Miller, Tajay Spears. I did move him up, so he was one of my biggest risers, I believe. He went from, let's see, 25, and not too much, 25 to 20. Pre and post NFL draft. I still have him behind Spears and Charbonnet, but I like the pick. I like the pick. I like the pick for best player available, I would say, but for Amaral's roster, like he's in a situation where he needs to hit on these picks, especially the ones in the first round. And I just don't love him going after a running back because like his team is at least 2 to 3 years away from like being good or like competitive, I'd say. And like by that time, A-Chain's already potentially off his rookie contract. So is it a guy he drafts and then moves? I don't know, but I don't love the idea of him going a first round pick on a running back when his roster's still a couple of years away from competing. But I do think he's the best player available in that spot.
Yeah, I think another direction he could go. I know that Amaral likes Mingo a lot. I know that was a guy he was really hoping the
You got
Pats
to get, yeah,
selected,
you got to
and
get
especially
Mingo.
having him shoot up the board with his draft capital going so early in the second round. I could see that also being a pick here at 13. I feel like it's probably between those two guys, just because I think after that, you're kind of it becomes more of a shot in the dark. I mean, you got guys like Kendre Miller, who's being brought in, third round running back, probably going to, or they're at least hoping that he can replace Alvin Kamara. But then you got, the other receivers available, whether it's Mims or Hyatt or Rice or Tillman or Downs. I think I'd rather go Mingo there. So as far as best running back or best receiver available, I think it's those two guys. I know those are two guys he's really high on. So I think it's going to be between those two. But all right, so that's the first end of our first round. I think we can go over some maybe honorable mentions. I'll start it off though. I think that one guy that I have not seen anybody talking about is Rashee Rice. So out of SMU, got drafted by Kansas City. I feel like maybe there's some Kansas City receiver fatigue here because I think we're tired of getting excited for the next big Kansas City receiver. Whether it's, Sky Moore, when they draft him. And, Rashee Rice has pretty much the same draft capital. I think he went 2 picks later than Sky Moore went in his draft last year. And then when you look at what they used to acquire Kadarius Toney, I believe it was like a third pick and a third rounder and a fourth rounder. So it's like these guys in that receiver room, like there's not heavy investment in anybody. They're not obligated to use, any of these guys over anybody else. Of course, Rice is a rookie coming in. Toney and Moore both got touchdowns in the Super Bowl. They've been working out also off season, so they do have that upper hand. But I think when we're looking at it, Rashee Rice, he's 6'1", he's athletic. I'm reading through his scouting profile, and pretty much the only knocks on him are that he maybe gets like a little too nonchalant when running his routes, maybe gets a little too happy trying to show off on jump balls, things like that. I think those are concerns that can be cleaned up, especially by an organization like Kansas City. So, we're talking about a guy with height, a guy with athleticism. He's not the same as Toney or Sky Moore. I think there's opportunity for him here. And I think the fact that he's the Kansas City receiver that people are stopping, getting hyped about, kind of stands out to me and makes you think, well, maybe this is the guy that we should be targeting because everybody's kind of overlooking him. So I think it's like a mid-second rounder. I don't know where he's going to go. I think he'd go on either side of that mid-second round. But I have him as my wide receiver 8. I think there's an argument for him to be even a little bit higher than that. But I really like Rashee Rice, and that's a guy I'm going to be looking at in the second round. Do you you got any thoughts on Rice? I saw you nodding your head.
Well, I mean, I had him on my board as the last wide receiver on my board. You actually didn't even have him on your board, which is interesting, right? Like you get a wide receiver that you didn't have on your board that goes second round to the Kansas City Chiefs, and now it's Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. Like you turn your head. We saw how much Sky Moore rised last year when he landed in KC, and I expect Rice to do the same thing. I don't expect him to be there by like 2-5 in the second round for us. Like he's gonna go early second round, just because I feel like he's a wide receiver that is now in Kansas City. And like you said, that receiver was pretty open. Like Kelsey's number 1, right? Toney, number 2, but they lost Juju. MVS didn't really show much last year. Sky Moore didn't really get the opportunity last year. Maybe he proves it this year. But he's open to get some target share there. And he's got Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback. So the only thing I'd say is like he didn't do much in college at all for at MSU. He had 400 yards one year, 700 yards one year, 1 touchdown, 600 yards another year, and 9 touchdowns. But then he exploded in 2022 with 100 catches, 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So like he came out of nowhere, bursted onto the scene in 2022. But even that scene was small, right? Like he's in MSU or SMU. Yeah. I don't know. Like I had him as my last wide receiver on the board. I didn't watch a ton of film on him, but a wide receiver that goes to KC turns your head in the second round. So yeah, I'm not gonna. I moved him up. I moved him up on my big board from. Let's see, moved him up from 30 pre-NFL draft to 19 on post-NFL draft. So 11 spots. That's a huge swing. Easily, probably my top riser that I moved up. So I like him. I still have guys like Mingo and Mims ahead of him, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. He's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you got him at 19. I got him at 20. Both are wide receiver 8. So, big riser for both of us. I think it will be interesting to see, and I'm very curious to see what the perception of him is in our league in our rookie draft. You got anybody that kind of stood
Yeah,
out to you in
you
these
kind of already brought him
second,
up.
third rounds?
Yeah, you kind of already brought him up, but I got to shout out Mingo. That's the kind of guy that I wrote in honorable mention blurb about. I had him at 15 post draft. You had him at 29, and then pre NFL draft, I had him at 15. You had him at 29. Post NFL draft, I have him now at 13. So I moved him up 2 spots, and then you moved him up to 15. So
Yeah.
you moved up 14 spots on your big board. That kind of stuck out to me. I think that's your highest riser that I saw. And one that I kind of already had pegged. I had him as wide receiver 6 going into the NFL draft, and he got drafted, draft capital as wide receiver 5, early second round after those big 4 in the first. So that just feels good to me because I watched that guy. I like him. I wrote the blurb about him. I talked about how guys like AJ Brown, DK Metcalf came out of Ole Miss. Same kind of profile, big receiver, big physical, contested catch kind of receiver, who could be a dominant wide receiver 1 in Carolina, right? Like now he's with my guy Bryce. They had a whole new coaching staff in Carolina, whole new offense. They brought in Thielen, who's dusty and old. They got Terrace Marshall, who hasn't done anything really in 2 years. And who's their third? I don't even know who the third receiver is.
DJ Chark. I got Chark.
Yeah, DJ Chark from Detroit. But anyway, he just came over this year. So like that wide receiver room is wide open.
Yeah.
He's going to be able to compete with those 3 guys to be wide receiver 1. I mean, we could be going into, we see we're going to see some videos of Jonathan Mingo during training camp. We're going to be like, all right, this dude might be wide receiver 1 in Carolina with the number 1 overall pick at quarterback. So I loved Mingo going into the draft, and I don't think he could have gotten a better situation. I love where he is post draft. Kind of guy that I'm going to go after to try to sneak into that second round and grab him.
Yeah, and a big thing. So talking about big risers, big fallers, I think the big takeaway for me in this draft was, I think that there's a lot of movement in that middle of my board, and a lot of it is because I had so many running backs ranked kind of in that early second round area. And then after seeing the draft, I moved so many running backs off my board or just all the way down to the bottom because it's like that draft capital is just so terrible. And maybe that could just be a sign of the times and how we're valuing running backs. And maybe 5 years from now, we look back and we say, well, you know what? Actually, if they have third and fourth round capital, it's actually not that bad. So it could be a start of something with how we're seeing teams want to go cheaper and cheaper on running backs. Could just be pushing the value back a little bit. Maybe something just stick a pin in and come back to that in a few years and see how that works out. But yeah, I just like the landing spots of these wide receivers so much more. And it seems like there's so much more value on them as opposed to some of these running backs. I mean, it's just tough to, get behind. I mean, Tyjae Spears and Israel Abanikanda. Those are guys that stick out to me just because I think that they're going to have some opportunities with Spears behind Derrick Henry, and then with Israel, he's in New York, and of course we have Breece Hall coming back from the ACL injury, so I think that they're going to have their opportunities. Roshan Johnson, I mean, Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman are there in Chicago, and I think that there is opportunity for him as a 4th round back, but it's like those are really like the only opportunities I see for these other backs. And yeah, I think I mentioned Kendry Miller earlier as well, but those are the only running backs that I see with like real chance at opportunity. I mean, there's Tank Bigsby, there's Chase Brown, there's Zach Evans. Those are guys that I could see, Bigsby in Jacksonville, he's behind ETN, but he was like a 3rd round pick. Chase Brown in Cincinnati, there were all those talks about them moving on from Mixon, and then Zach Evans in LA with the Rams. Of course, Cam Akers looked like he was back to what we expected at the end of last year, but he's still dealing, with coming back from that Achilles. He has looked very bad at a lot of times. So I think those are other guys that have opportunities. But besides that, I don't love where some of these running backs went. But I will say 2 guys that I am looking at, or one guy that I'm really looking at is a guy that was very high on when we did our last mock draft, which was Sean Tucker. So he signed down in Tampa Bay.
Undrafted free agent.
Fournette is no longer there. What's that?
Undrafted, right?
So he was an undrafted free agent. And I think one tip that I picked up on was when you're looking at undrafted free agents, of course, it's already tough to predict who's going to hit, who's not, because they bring up the guys like Doug Baldwin or Austin Eckler, things like that. But, for every one guy you name there's 100 guys that went undrafted and didn't turn into shit. But one thing that you want to look for is guys that drop to undrafted because whether it was injury or attitude problem, you don't want them dropping because they stink. And the big thing with Sean Tucker was that there was a heart issue that popped up with him. He wasn't able to work out at the combine. He did his own, pro day a few days before the draft. I don't know if that rubbed some teams the wrong way, but either way, it's tough to get that information out. So him stepping in there and, Rashad White, he looked good, but I didn't think that he was like unbelievable last year. I think he looked good for a rookie. I still think that running back room is pretty open. I think that a lot of things could change in that Buccaneers team in the next year or two with guys like, Evans getting older, and then, he's also expensive. Same with Chris Godwin. I think they got to make some, tough decisions as far as that goes. So I think that, he's a very interesting player there as far as, having an opportunity to step up as an undrafted free agent who probably won't even go drafted in our league. I think another one that I find interesting is Muhammad Ibrahim, who he went to Detroit. He was a Minnesota guy, but he was like a really hard runner in college. He dealt with some injuries. I think he's a little bit older coming out. But we just saw, what a guy like Jamal Williams was able to do and step up in that Detroit offense. Of course, they brought in Gibbs. Of course, they signed Monty. But I do think that he's a sneaky guy that could become their RB3 in Detroit. And I think that he has that style of play that really works well in that Dan Campbell offense. So I think that those are two undrafted free agents that I'm really keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about the running backs. Like, it's also like interesting. Like, we were coming into this class saying, "Oh, the running backs, the running backs, the running backs." Like, this was supposed to be a super heavy running back, running back class, and low on the wide receivers, right? Like, kind of, it was a reverse story from last year. Now all of a sudden, we love the top four wide receivers. We're speaking highly of even the 5, 6 guys, and we drop the running backs down. So I think it just really shows you where the NFL is headed. And it's all wide receivers. It's really all wide receivers with the quarterback or the running backs all being in these committees. Like, besides Robinson and Gibbs, right? You have got Spears behind Henry, Charbonnet with Walker, A-Chain seems like he's alone in Miami. So I feel like that's like people could jump at opportunity. But then you got Kendre Miller in New Orleans. So I think that is a name to keep an eye on, right? Because we don't really know what's going to happen with this Alvin Kamara situation, right? Like, I don't know. Do you see that video? It is damning evidence. Like, he strikes the dude, and then he's in the Uber after talking about how he connected so hard with that MFer. So, like, we don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller could see some opportunity real early. So I think that's keep an eye on, to keep an eye on for opportunity. And then you got, like you said, Gibbs or Bigsby with ETN, Roshan Johnson. I forget who was in the New York Jets. Evan Canada was in the Jets, and yeah. So like everyone is in a committee now. So I think you just got to trust the player that you believe in, and then maybe keep an eye on A-Chain and Kendre Miller because they could get that opportunity early with their situations. So the running backs are interesting. The running backs are very interesting. Another name I wanted to bring up was Luke Schoonmaker. Luke Schoonmaker. I didn't even have him on my big board. I had 5 tight ends ahead of this dude. You did have him on your big board pre-NFL draft. No, you didn't. No, neither of us did. Yeah, neither of us had him on our big board, but we both had 5 tight ends over him. And then Luke Schoonmaker now gets drafted by Dallas in the 2nd round, I believe. After they're moving on from Schultz, and it seems like he's going to move. Like, it's going to be an open competition there between Ferguson and Hendershot, I think, and then this guy. So the capital they gave to Schumacher, like, he could be a tight end 1 in Dallas. We saw Dalton Schultz do what Dalton Schultz did the other year, even with CeeDee Lamb there. So I think that's an eye to keep an eye on, a name to keep an eye on. I completely whiffed on him. And then the other name I wanted to bring up was Kayshon Boutte. So I didn't even have him on my big board. I
We're top 10 guy of yours.
Yeah. I mean, Boutte's interesting. Like, he was wide receiver top 3 wide receiver coming into the year, and then he just fell off the face of the earth, right? So, like, I didn't even have him on big board pre-draft. I love the fact that he went to New England. Like, I love that we're getting a value in a guy that had, 1st round potential going into the last year of college football. But from a fantasy perspective, he landed in New England. And if your name's not, Randy Moss or Rob Gronkowski, like, we haven't had a fantasy relevant guy. I mean, sure, we got Mondre now, but like, wide receivers, we haven't had a fantasy relevant wide receiver in a long time. So I love it for New England. I don't like it for dynasty reasons. I still have him. I did put him on my big board at 32 out of 37. So we'll see that. We'll see how that goes. But I love it for New England. And then the last point I wanted to make was these QBs, these late QBs. I know you had some thoughts on them. Do you want to talk about QBs?
What about them?
Like, I know you said earlier that you said we'd mentioned like to some of these QBs in the back half of.
Oh yeah. So I have two more guys on my big board. You have a couple other names that I didn't include, but yeah, one guy. So obviously, Hendon Hooker's been a guy that I've been huge on, huge on,
Yeah.
and that was a guy I was looking at 10, 11. But I've also said, if I don't feel like that's the right move, like if Hendon is the best player available on the board when I'm picking, I'm gonna take him. Like I want him on my team. I do think that he's gonna be, he's gonna find success in the NFL. But right now, when I'm looking at 10 and 11, I don't think that that's the right pick for my team. I'm hoping that he can be there for me at 2-3, where I can scoop him up as well, because I think he'd be a great taxi squad guy while he's recovering from the ACL, while he's backing up Jared Goff. When I had first put him in our last mock draft, I had said, I'm looking for that second round draft capital. I kept making the Jalen Hurts comparison as far as where he'd go in the draft. There were the rumors that he was going to sneak into the first round, which got me really excited. But he did fall and he went early in the third. But it's also one of those where, if you look at it, and I'm sure you could do this for a lot of guys, but with Hendon, I'm obviously biased and just had to dig into it a little bit. When you look, right, we were looking at, I think it was the 52nd pick of the draft where Charbonnet went to Seattle. That was a pick that we were looking at to be a good landing spot for Hendon. The
Yep.
next 15 picks after that were teams that have zero need at quarterback. We're talking the Chargers, the Bengals, the Bills, the Chiefs. Those teams had multiple picks in that span. So I think that's one of those where, if there was maybe more demand there and there were teams that might be QB needy, we could have seen some teams get aggressive, try and trade up. Or if those QB needy teams were there, they might have just taken him there. But I think that because there was such little demand, that allowed him to fall. And I think the Lions were kind of like, holy shit, like, look at this. He's going to drop right to us. So I do see the opportunity for him there in Detroit. I don't, even though I wish he went in the second round, or of course, the first round, I'm not too scared about the third round draft capital. But when it comes to me picking, Levis at 10 or 11, over Hendon, that's because, I have to look at that gap in the draft capital. I did already have Levis ranked ahead of Hendon on my big board to begin with. But, I just look at that and I say, well, I think that Tannehill is going to be out of there in Tennessee, where I think, like, they have Goff and they just played really well with him in Detroit. I could see a situation where he does get a long-term extension. All of a sudden, Hendon's screwed.
Yeah.
And, maybe he's just a high-level backup. I think that comparisons like Deshaun Watson are good for his play style. I could also see him being a high-level backup like Jacoby Brissett, where, he can provide that with his legs. He can do the passing, all that. But as far as where my team's at and needing that quarterback, I'm hoping I can scoop him up in the second round. I think he might drop a little bit, but I can't put that high first round grade on him anymore, just because I don't see that immediate path, where I might have, where if he went to Seattle or Washington or something like that. I think it's going to be a lot tougher for him to get a starting job in Detroit. So if I can get him later, keep him on the taxi squad, that'll be great. But if not, it is what it is. Sometimes it's honestly better to not get too emotionally attached to your players to begin with, because then when you have to trade them, you don't want to.
Yeah.
But the only other quarterback I had on my board, and then there is somebody that I might add on because I do think it's interesting, but I have Stetson Bennett at 32. He's my QB6. Yep. I keep saying, I just feel like Stetson's going to have a moment in the NFL. I feel like we see this plenty of times in sports where it's like these college guys step up at some point. He went to the Rams, I believe, right? Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
we just saw Stafford sit out for so much of the season with injuries. He's been injury prone in the past. There have been talks about him retiring. He's dealing with a spinal injury. That door could be open for Stetson Bennett pretty soon. So it just, it fits my narrative, and I just feel like it's going to happen. But one other guy that I do think is interesting that I don't see on either of our big boards is Aiden O'Connell. I believe went to Purdue. He got drafted by the Raiders. I was reading when he got drafted that his release has often been compared to Tom Brady. So I see that. I see that he's going to the Raiders. He has a chance to sit behind Jimmy G for a little bit and learn. I think that could be a very sneaky play down the road, just as like a undrafted pickup or just somebody that you throw on the taxi squad. So that's a quarterback that I am a little bit interested in, at that cost, which is pretty much just going to be free. But, you got any other quarterbacks you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Jake Hayner and DTR too. Like, I don't think people realize. Like, I'll make the comparison. I'll shout myself out as a GM here. I bought Bailey Zappi for $54 a fab, right? Whatever, $54 a fab. He started one game, looked great, and I got offered a second round pick for him. I didn't take him, but I got offered a second round pick for him. Davis Mills looked great for that first year. Traded him to you. You took a shot on him. Didn't work out, but I got a 25 first out of it. Sam Howell, fifth round quarterback at the NFL draft, but had first round looks like going into college, going into his last year in college. Got him for nothing. Last pick of the draft last year. Now he's a starting quarterback in 2023. So like this is dynasty superflex. There's no quarterback that I will not look at. Stetson Bennett behind Noodle Arm Stafford. You've got Jake Hayner. Where do you forget where Jake Hayner went?
You go to the Saints. I want to say the Saints.
He went to the. Let's see. Him and Stetson Bennett went straight back to back. Yeah, Jake Hayner went before Stetson Bennett to the Saints.
Yeah,
they got Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston. Who knows who's going to be their quarterback?
And that's his childhood team. I just read.
All right, now he's a hometown hero. It's just you can't. And then DTR, I don't think DTR is going to get drafted. Obviously, he's sitting behind Watson. It's a huge contract, but injuries happen. This is a dynasty superflex league. You cannot look over these quarterbacks, especially if they get drafted behind injury-prone guys or on teams that have situations they spent the draft capital on them. There's no reason why the Saints might suck next year, and they give Jake Hayner a start in week 17, 16. Maybe he shows out and you can grab a second for him, or maybe he becomes their starter like Howell does. So I just think these quarterbacks, I'm always going to give them a look. I'm always going to spend that fab. Everyone knows my fab strategy. I plan on running it back this year. And I intend to be very, very active post-draft with whoever does not get added or drafted.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point just about strategy too, where I think in the back half of these drafts, I think people are still so focused on maybe finding somebody that can become a starter for them, right? And when you draft a guy so cheap and he hits, you get kind of sentimental towards it, and you don't want to give him up, or I want to see this through, things like that. But you kind of have to realize, right, if you draft a guy in the third round, whether it's any position, could be a quarterback, running back, receiver, whatever. If you draft him in the third round, you have to consider what the hit rates are of third round picks versus second round picks versus third round picks. So if you get a guy in the third round and he's not part of your overall vision, because your starting lineup, you want it to be as star-studded as possible. So if you think, well, you know what, I got this guy in the third round, he became a very good flex player for me, but he's never going to be my starter. And you have the opportunity to turn that third round pick into a second round pick, or even more than that. You should be looking to take that advantage. You're take advantage of that. And I think with quarterbacks, you can see that that return kind of multiply, because of course, okay, I can trade you this one receiver for a second. But yeah, like you said, with a guy like Davis Mills, that's a guy that you traded, you got a future first round pick for that. Or even like you said, you could have gotten a second rounder for Zappy, who you just picked up off of waivers. So infamously you paid 50 whatever fab for him. You could have gotten him for one. But I mean, just think about that. If you did just get him for one and you trade him for any type of pick, that's insane to turn that much fab, even 100 fab, to turn 100 fab that you're never going to get back anyways into a third round pick or a second round pick. Imagine you took 100 fab right now, offered it to somebody for their second rounder. They'd say no. But if you turn that 100 fab into a pick and you turn that into a second rounder, you'd be an absolute genius. So I do think that people get too sentimental with these picks. They want to try and hit on these guys, and they don't think about it more as an investment, where if I can take this low guy and kind of flip them and build them up into something else, all of a sudden that gets my team further down the road. And that's kind of how I've approached it too, where sometimes you might not be getting, the full value for a player, but when you consider what you paid for him, you got to look at it as profit. So if you got a guy for a second rounder and you flipped him to get a first or a star player, that's a good use of that asset. So, to each their own, and people can manage it however they want. But that's kind of how I've always approached it. And I've taken that value approach. If I'm getting good value on a guy, then, I'll seriously consider it.
I'd be happy.
But, all right. I think that kind of covers it. I mean, we're going to have, I'm going to put this video in the blog like I always do, have my explanations there. We're going to come out with our big board blog and just kind of highlight a few of these risers and fallers, and maybe try and touch on the guys that we didn't get to in this conversation, as well as maybe further highlight other guys that we did bring up. But we got our draft in day and a half now. We're getting very, very close. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope that when we get this out Wednesday morning, draft morning, people use this and they really listen, because I think real listeners of the show should nail this draft. They should be very excited. They should nail this draft. But all right, we'll leave it there. We're going to be back next week with our post-draft reactions. We're going to do my report card. It's the Lex and Pete Show, brought to you by Sundog Multimedia and Easy Peasy Moving and Service. We will see you next week. How the hell do I end this recording?